During my between jobs phase a few years back, I ended up playing a lot of video games. I guess that's pretty apropos for anyone in a between jobs phase, where you try and stave off the madness and anxiety of the seemingly endless job hunt by tricking your mind into thinking it's doing something productive, while really trying to convince yourself that the job market right now just sucks and it doesn't matter if you've sent dozens of applications and follow-up emails because someone has to get around to you eventually. You're hireable, you're not a leech on society and a failure as an adult. Those bills you gotta pay aren't gonna add up and leave you penniless on the street. You're fine, it's fine. Naturally, some of the games I played to ease my troubled mind were most of the Resident Evil series.
Resident Evil.
I'm pretty sure you don't need me to tell you how iconic this series is, even if you've never played any of the games. Which, I don't know why you'd be watching this video in that case, but hey, you do you. Often credited with creating or at least codifying the term survival horror, the Resident Evil series has relied on the entire gamut of classic horror tropes and gameplay mechanics to create one of the most enduring franchises across the media landscape, with games spanning dozens of consoles across 3 decades, and spinning off into movie and TV adaptations that,
Right. I mostly just read Zootopia porn, so...
Well, maybe the Zach Kreger movie will be fun.
Oh no! Hamlet, turn around! He turned into a vampire! He's gonna punch you!
The series was always one of those iconic franchises on my get around to eventually list, which shot up significantly around 2021 for reasons.
Well, Ethan Winters. You escaped my little brother's idiot games, did you?
All I wanna do is run and be pursued by a giant woman. A giant woman! And with ample free time on my plate circa late 2023 to early 2024, I finally took the plunge behind the scary loading screen door, but the remake version, so no jump scares.
Hey there, if you want to find my sunken treasure chest, you'll have to try better than that.
And had a pretty fun time marathoning most of the mainline games. Mainly the remakes of the first 3, 0, the ports of 4 through 6, and Code Veronica.
Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry. I don't want you following me, lady. You'll only slow me down.
Oh, Steven, you are the worst.
Shut up!
I'd always had a cursory knowledge of the series' gradual transformation from survival horror to action horror, starting with the ever-portable Resident Evil 4.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
But playing through the games myself, I was a little surprised just how hard the later entries leaned into the action over the horror, with 5 and 6 in particular all but abandoning the series' roots in favor of co-op, Call of Duty-esque scenario shoot-'em-ups, complete with roided-up boulder punching and whatever the hell Michael Bay shit this is. While I'm not entirely negative on 5 or 6, I'll freely admit that they were a bit of a chore to play through at times. And I definitely appreciated the series at its subtler, moodier horror that the early games provided in spades. That dreaded anticipation of what might be behind the next corner. What shambling mass or creepy crawly could stand between me and the next objective, or even what the next objective was. The tense atmosphere that makes you clench every orifice as you wander dark and abandoned hallways. Going through the bombastic and discordant levels of 5 and 6 especially, made me yearn for those simpler times in the Arclay Mansion or the Raccoon City Police Department, with limited ammo supply and plenty of freaks, geeks, and everything else that gave me the sheets, to provide that true survival horror masochistic thrill. Fortunately, upon booting up the demo for the very next game, I was immediately met with the answer to my nightmares. Words can't fully express the sheer dread I felt within the first few seconds of the beginning hour demo of Resident Evil VII. I knew full well that this game was a return to the series' horror roots. Heck, I remember seeing the big E3 reveal back in the day, where the horror and the fact that you could experience it in VR was practically the main star. I had also seen various Let's Players playing at least the first few hours of the story, so I knew full well that Capcom wasn't screwing around this time. But it's one thing to see someone else experience these first-person horrors, and a whole other ballpark to experience it yourself. Especially after coming off of...
Those 3 anti-aircraft turrets are holding up the bay.
You have no idea how unnerving it was to be thrust into the derelict setting of the demo and given the simple objective, get out of the house. The space you're given to explore is small, the means to complete your objective not immediately apparent, and the only sound is the creaking of old wood in the walls or the floorboards, making you wonder if it's just the house settling, or if someone else may be in there with you. I don't think I was ever more terrified of the unknown while playing a Resident Evil game than with this demo. Scared out of my wits that something or someone was going to get me, even looking it up to make sure that nothing or no one would. There's one actively hostile enemy you have to worry about in the whole demo, and even then you kind of have to go out of your way to encounter it. Everything else is just ambience. The creaking, the wind, the mannequin being flung from God knows where by God knows who. Suffice to say, this demo made for a very intriguing and intimidating first impression. If just a small snippet of gameplay where arguably nothing happens could get me this spooked, how would the rest of the game fare? Atmosphere in general is one of my favorite things about horror. The way certain horror media will let a scene play out, linger on a dark corner and let your mind fill in the gaps of what could come crawling out of it. Oftentimes, your imagination can do the legwork for the story, but there are rare occasions where the creature inside lives up to every creeping terror. Oh my god, a pretty lady! In the case of Resident Evil VII, the demo and the main game, there's one element of this creeping dread that more than lived up to expectation. A key aspect to the gameplay and story I keep alluding to, but haven't fully addressed yet. The proprietors of the decrepit hellhole you find yourself in. Your gracious hosts, the bakers.
What the hell?
Rise and shine, sleepyhead. It's time for supper.
One look at the state of the guest house in the demo and opening hour of the game proper, and your stomach churns at the thought of who could call a place like this home sweet home. One look at the spread matriarch margaritas prepared, and you may wish you never had a stomach. The first impression only gets worse as Patriarch Jack cuts off his rowdy son Lucas's arm for playing with his food, and proceeds to show you where the airplane lands.
Oh shit, he's not eating it, Jack! He's not eating it!
Shut the hell up, Marguerite!
I made that for him!
Get the hell out of here!
You're a son of a bitch!
This Texas Chainsaw-style family dinner is made all the worse by the game's unbroken first-person perspective. A first-time implementation to the series with the explicit purpose of playing through in VR. An experience I have, as of yet, not been able to enjoy.
Where do you think you're going?
Even without the pleasure of an up-close encounter, the Bakers are without a doubt some of the scariest enemies Resident Evil has to offer. Jack in particular acting as a pursuer-type enemy that will actively stalk and hunt you down in the early hours as you navigate the mansion.
Slip out before dinner was done?
There have been several pursuer-type enemies throughout the series run, mostly in the form of big hulking beasts a la Mr. X from Resident Evil 2.
Jesus Christ! X gon' give it to you. Wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you.
And while it can be plenty scary to be pursued by these beasts, there is also a dark thrill to it. Bumping into X or Nemesis in the original Resident Evil 3 provides a rush of excitement at the danger of being chased by a vastly superior enemy with limited resources to fight back. The same is also true of Lady Dimitrescu in the next game, even if the rush I feel in that instance is... Oh, hi, come here often?
Wait long.
It doesn't hurt that the protagonist of RE7, newcomer Ethan Winters, is about as average an average Joe as you could ever be in this series. No police or military training, no greater connection to the BOWs or the mad scientists who made them. Just a guy looking for his long-lost, presumed dead wife, literally stumbling into something much bigger than him, and now has to fight like hell to get out alive, and relatively in one piece. Moving slow as molasses and having literally nothing to defend himself with. All you can do as Jack lumbers towards you is run, hide, and pray. Pray that his pathfinding will be merciful, that he doesn't inspect the corner you're hiding in too carefully, and that you can make it past with all your limbs intact. The more I played RE7 and the longer it sat with me in comparison to its predecessors and immediate sequel, the more confident I became that it was probably the scariest the series was ever going to get, which was already pretty impressive given some of the other terrors that populate this franchise. Yeah, not a fan of the Black Tiger. But while there's plenty of chills to be had from giant spiders, zombies, or Matrix cosplayers, the Bakers remain an especially effective group of antagonists because of how real they are. While the circumstances surrounding them are obviously exaggerated, it's not uncommon to see a dynamic similar to theirs in reality. A dysfunctional and heavily abusive dynamic between parents and their children, infecting what should be a loving and peaceful residence with its evil. This isn't exactly a unique observation from me. Plenty who played this game cite the Bakers as the major reason for its effectiveness. The twisted reflection they present of the all-American nuclear family has been thoroughly dissected by smarter people than myself. Writing for The Escapist, Audric Figueroa says of the game, "What makes Resident Evil VII's horror so effective is its intimate portrayal of the breakdown of a family unit. Through perverting and distorting the concept of family, the game moves the focus from transient fears of spooky monsters to personal anxieties like abuse, parental neglect, and problem children." Reflecting on this kind of got me to thinking about the horror genre as a whole, and how some of the most iconic and scariest films that have stood the test of time are also a twisted perversion of the healthy family unit. The aforementioned clan of cannibalistic killers in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the degradation of a patriarch's sanity and swapping of roles from protector to hunter in The Shining. Hell, even when I was a kid, some of the movies I watched weren't too shy about showing some messed up clans of psychos. Have you ever noticed how the original Pete's Dragon opens up with a song about prospective adopted child abuse?
If I get near him, you can bet I won't miss him with this.
It's a pretty common setup to see what starts out as a normal or even happy family dynamic deteriorate into a house of horrors as the story goes on. And I think that's because it's a pretty universal taboo that puts a horror-seeking audience into an immediate zone of discomfort. In movies, you're automatically placed as a passive, omniscient observer, expected to do nothing but watch these scenes play out, unable to intervene even if you wanted to. Like going over to a friend's house and becoming an unwanted spectator to a full-blown shouting match between them and their parents. For me, that's what makes movies like Hereditary so effective. And moments like the dinner scene where a mother lays into her son due to repressed rage and grief so unnerving to witness. Long before anything overtly supernatural has even occurred, I feel like I'm seeing something I shouldn't. Breaking a societal taboo as I watch Toni Collette lose her shit at the Naked Brothers Band Boy and not even get an Oscar nom for it.
Because nobody admits anything they've done!
Fucking hell, Ari Aster, what is wrong with you?
This man made me feel uncomfortable.
You sick monster!
In the case of a video game, however, the horror hits on a completely different level because you're not just a passive observer. You are literally put into the perspective of the character who experiences these horrors. Ethan, his wife Mia, and the DLC introduces the perspectives of other victims to the Bakers' southern hospitality. Clancy, who gets some special mother's love treatment from Marguerite, and Zoe, the Baker's own daughter. It's actually through her DLC, Daughters, that we see the night things went south for the Baker clan. where Jack and Marguerite shift from loving and benign parents into the sadistic monsters they become in the game proper.
Look at all the pretties my little girl is giving me!
Jack was already a terrifying and imposing figure as Ethan, but through Zoe's eyes it somehow becomes even worse as he turns his ire towards her, flying into a rage and pounding at the door with full intent to harm her. The only thing you can do is think on your feet and run before he can, hiding in the shadows as he and Marguerite search the house for you. It's always more than a little unnerving when you see a family come undone like this, especially when you're given the context as to who they were before. Because a family is supposed to be a source of protection, much as your house, by its nature, is meant to make you feel secure. A sanctuary from the world at large, a place of comfort to forget about the troubles beyond the front door. Writing for Impact magazine, journalist Jesse Staines argues this is exactly why haunted house stories remain in circulation. It takes us out of our comfort zone by violating our private space. The horror house is therefore created through exposing audiences to feelings of insecurity and peril. While the haunted house concept was originally presented more as a gothic fantasy, homes that we imagine would be riddled with the supernatural, modern horrors tend to resemble a more ordinary suburban residence occupied by a typical family. This all brings the horror that bit closer to home. Although the Baker residence is a mite bigger and has a few more elaborate puzzles than the average household,
who builds this shit?
It's still a much more domestic setting than any in the Resident Evil series thus far. Even the Spencer Mansion in the very first game is much more akin to the grand, gothic haunted house of the more romantic variety. The kind of house a character will wander into as a stranger, rather than an intended place of sanctuary. With the Baker house, there's a sense of domesticity that makes it feel more real, more lived in. The disarrayed furniture and clutter in every room, not too far off from the type you might find in a house whose residents have fallen behind on some cleaning. Hell, it's probably not too hard to go out and find a similar looking house close to where you live. Though it's fittingly more grandiose as benefiting the needs of an engaging video game, it's not too far off from the clutter I might find in a relative's house, or even my own if I'm being honest here. All of this would be enough to make the Bakers stand out as more realistic among the over-the-top antagonists the Resident Evil series has to offer. But it goes even deeper than that when you consider the extra layers to their depravity and the true cause behind it. For, as Staines continues to say in the aforementioned article, it is, however, not only this violation of the safe and familiar suburban setting that creates fear, but also the deeper meaning behind many horror movies, most notably, their critique of modern anxieties. The horror house is used to resemble these contemporary issues, acting as a symbolic structure that reveals the dark truths of our existence. And I think one dark truth that these types of stories reveal about ourselves is that we as a society aren't really ready to accept how horrifyingly mundane this type of evil can be. There are all sorts of contributing factors as to why a family can become dysfunctional, of course, and domestic horror of this nature explores those facets in a multitude of ways, using possession as an allegory for alcoholism, depression, or generational trauma. But in all these examples, and even in RE7, the evil doesn't really come from within. It's almost always an outside factor, an intruder that tips the scale.
They're mine now.
What?
In typical RE style, the more you explore the Baker household, the more about their history is revealed. How the trouble that started in this humble corner of Louisiana didn't truly begin until the arrival of a little girl named Evelyn, who was intent to create a new family for herself, even if she had to beg, borrow, or steal to get it. For 3 years, she's held the Bakers hostage in their own home, prisoners in their own minds as she commands them to bring more people to complete their family, molding those unfortunate enough to not be brutally tortured to death into mindless, mold-like creatures that do her every bidding.
What the?
Ironically, in these later moments of the game where the mold take over as the typical recurring enemies, it loses a lot of the dread that made the first half so effective. Whereas before you had very little to defend yourself, the types of weapons you're given are more varied and resources more plentiful. Jack himself comes back in a much more monstrous form to act as a traditional late-stage boss, losing a lot of what made him so effective as a pursuer, and even as a boss in the earlier sections.
This is getting old, Jack!
Getting back on topic, while it doesn't necessarily take away from the horror of earlier sections, knowing that the Bakers' actions weren't really their own, it does follow in the typical mold, har, of stories like this where the evil is not entirely the family's own. That while supplementary material reveals Jack could have a bit of a mean streak and indulge in a little alcoholism, he was ultimately just an average, well-meaning man who cared for his family. Marguerite, too, was an ordinary housewife and mother, caring for her children and for the seemingly ordinary little girl her husband found in the bayou. And their son, Lucas.
Have a nice day.
Well, Lucas is his own can of worms.
Whew. This cat was sick before I even got here.
Ultimately, though, I think the source of familial degradation in horror stories like this being some supernatural force outside of their control reinforces the taboo that surrounds domestic horror. The idea that there's no way a real-life family could ever fall to the state by their own devices. That a man like Jack would have to have been under the control of a literal test tube baby that infected his mind with violent urges that he had no choice but to enact. And, like I said, there are many contributing factors that may lead someone to abusive tendencies. But it doesn't take supernatural possession for someone to enact their worst tendencies on the people closest to them. To bring out a monster far worse than a whole team's worth of creative people could conceive. I had a fairly standard family dynamic growing up. 2 sisters, 2 parents, a couple of pets. We didn't always get along, and we all had some bumps along the road to our adulthoods. But at least from my perspective, it was a bog standard and ultimately healthy dynamic that I assumed most people had. Whenever I would hear about child abuse or alcoholic parents, it was always framed as something that seemed far off. A distant problem that other people had, and even then was an aberration against the norm. I don't even know where I got that framing. My parents never exactly sugarcoated things for me when I asked them stuff. I guess, in my own naive sense of universality, I just assumed that everybody grew up with loving parents and siblings, even if you could push each other's buttons every so often. Growing up, however, and hearing the stories of less fortunate people on the internet or from close friends and even other family members, you can't help but think that maybe the seemingly normal childhood that you had was really the one that was out of the norm. I was lucky enough to never have a Jack Baker in my life, but the things I've heard of other people's childhoods, I know he definitely exists. No mold required. And that thought alone is enough to send shivers down my spine. Resident Evil VII remains one of the scariest experiences I've ever had playing a game, and is my personal pick for scariest in the series as a whole, even if the latest entry has given me some moments. But even for all the thrills RE is capable of providing, from scientific monstrosities to the existential fears of parenthood, Nothing will ever hit so close to home as the Bakers, even if I've never had anything close to them waiting for me at home, thankfully. I guess, in a way, that puts me more in Ethan's slow-as-molasses shoes than I thought. We don't know much about his upbringing or what his life was even like before this game, but nothing implies that it was anything other than painfully mundane. He's a fairly generic protagonist, all things considered, an everyman you're meant to inhabit near completely. And yes, he gets a little more characterization in the next one, don't at me. But there is one quality he has that's downright admirable after everything he goes through. Empathy. When Jack talks to him late in the game, explaining the effects that Evelyn has had on his family, Ethan responds with a surprising amount of grace to the man who's been physically and psychologically torturing him for the past several hours. He also tries his damnedest to save Mia, even after she nearly killed him back at the guest house. Hell, there's a moment near the end where he even seems to feel sorry for Evelyn, despite being the whole cause of their collective misery. And I think it's this empathetic trait that makes it so easy to feel impacted by the horror that permeates this game, and every domestic horror story like it. Though I was lucky enough to never experience terrors such as these, I know and love people who have. And to those who have somehow made it out of the darkness and found light on the other side, for whatever it's worth, there aren't words to express how admirable I find you, how proud I am of you. It's not easy to try and be a good person after experiencing anything close to what Ethan or Zoe or anyone else in this game does. And in a way, I can even understand why certain people can come out the other end perpetuating the same cycle of abuse and trauma onto others, just as Evelyn does. But choosing to move on, choosing to live life in a way that perpetuates goodness and empathy after dealing with such traumatic circumstances, it's one of the hardest things I can imagine someone having to do. It sounds self-explanatory, like given the simple objective of getting out of the house. But that kind of trauma, it always has a way of following you, finding you, whether you want it to or not.
Welcome to the family, son.
Stupid man thing! You won't live long, even if you run!
Owie wowie! Baby wants mommy! Make it jerk!